The movie begins with the First Lady of the USA, Mrs. Eleanor Roosevelt, declining to participate in a reception in order to visit a woman named Ludmila Pavlichenko. Mrs. Eleanor Roosevelt then hands the address to her driver and recalls the story of Ludmila Pavlichenko. Back in 1942, Mrs. Roosevelt was meeting some soldiers in the International Anti-Fascist Assembly. There, she met a female Soviet sniper named Ludmila Pavlichenko. When asked about her accomplishments in the war, Ludmila replies she killed 306 fascist enemies. Amazed by how a female sniper killed that many enemies, Ludmila instantly became popular, and the press in the US even gave her the nickname Lady Death. The Soviets are also trying to raise funds for the ongoing war, but so far they're failing to gain enough funds. Just then, Ludmila gets informed that Mrs. Roosevelt has invited her to stay in the White House during her stay in the USA. The Soviets aren't comfortable with it, but allow Ludmila to accept Mrs. Roosevelt's offer, as they view it as a golden opportunity to raise sufficient funds. So, Ludmila Pavlichenko goes to stay in the White House, where she's given a nice room. The movie then moves back to 1937 in Kiev State University, when Ludmila was just a young girl who got accepted into the university. This is a big deal for Ludmila, as she wants to make her father proud. However, her father, who is a Soviet soldier, feels there is nothing to celebrate and undervalues her achievement. One day, while out with her friends, they can't decide whether to go watch a movie or to go range shooting. After tossing a coin, they decide to go range shooting. There, Ludmila steps up to compete against her male friends. Having never shot a rifle before, Ludmila surprises everyone by scoring 47 out of 50 points, completely outscoring her male counterparts. Soon, word gets out about Ludmila's exceptional shooting talent. Then, one day a high-ranking officer from the Soviet Red Army informs Ludmila that she has been selected to go on a 6-month training camp. Ludmila, of course, doesn't want to go, but the head officer clarifies that refusing is not an option. So, Ludmila prepares for her training camp, and on her departure, her father yet again shows no emotion towards her. Following the training, Ludmila goes to the beach to spend her free time. There she gets introduced to her friend's brother Boris, a Jewish doctor. Boris is interested in Ludmila and tells her that his parents want him to get married to her. Despite getting approached by other men who seem to be much stronger and manlier, Ludmila simply pays no attention to any man. One day, Boris takes Ludmila to her parents where she gets asked weird questions about herself and her family. It seems they really want to make her their daughter-in-law. During this, news gets out on the radio that Hitler has waged war and his army has invaded the Soviet Union. Following this news, Ludmila wants to join the war and help her country. But Boris asks her to not waste her life like that and get married to him. However, Ludmila is adamant that she wants to help as she has the skills for it. So she leaves the prospect of getting married and joins the war against Nazi Germany. After joining the Soviet army, Ludmila goes through intense training under Comrade Major, who treats the female soldiers just as ruthlessly as males. When he finds that the female soldiers were keeping feminine stuff in their camp, he lectures them for not taking the war seriously and burns their belongings right in front of all the soldiers. The intense training continues for days and weeks. Then one day during a camouflage exercise, Ludmila impresses the comrade through her camouflage skills. Moreover, her sniper training also gets herself noticed by the comrade. Impressed by Ludmila, he assigns her on a mission with veteran sniper Makarov. On her first time on the battlefield, she witnesses the true horror of the war. She sees soldiers dying left and right, but she still keeps her composure and manages to find her sniper. She then takes precise shots at the Nazi tank and kills the tank operator. Through her sniper shots, the Soviet army managed to keep their post. Following her impressive contribution on the battlefield, the general awards her with a semi-automatic SVT rifle and compliments her in front of all the other soldiers. Later, Makarov tries helping Ludmila understand the mechanics of her new rifle. During this, she asks if Makarov is married. Makarov answers that he had a wife. Just then, Ludmila hears a voice and finds out that her friend Masha had joined the army as a nurse. When Masha sees Makarov, she asks if he's Ludmila's boyfriend. Ludmila replies that he'll be soon. Turns out, Ludmila has taken a liking to Makarov and is interested in starting a relationship with him. During another battle, Leonid yet again shows great form by sniping 2 enemies with 1 bullet. She is full of confidence and wants to get more kills, but Makarov commands her not to get cocky and hold her position. Meanwhile, Masha has a really hard time trying to help 2 wounded soldiers. Fortunately, they all survive another day. That night, Ludmila is having dinner with Masha, her boyfriend, and another soldier. These are the same guys they met on the beach. Masha was impressed by one of the guys, but Ludmila clearly has no interest. However, the guy really wants Ludmila and forces himself on her. Makarov sees this and goes to interrupt, but before he could do so, Ludmila defends herself. Later, Ludmila confesses her love for Makarov and kisses him. But Makarov apologizes to her and says they can't be together. Next day, Ludmila asks him the reason, and Makarov replies that starting a love affair during a war is not a good idea, as they both might end up dying any time. Ludmila insists the war cannot kill them. However, minutes later, they get attacked by a Nazi grenade. Ludmila gets heavily injured and Makarov has to pull her out of the rubbles and take her to the doctor. When she regains her consciousness, Ludmila realizes that no one is truly immune to war and they can die any moment. Later, it is revealed that Boris also joined the war as a military doctor. When Boris sees Ludmila with Makarov, it results in a very awkward conversation between him and Makarov on who will get to be with Ludmila. Back in 1942, Ludmila is enjoying her time with Mr. Roosevelt. But when Mrs. Roosevelt drops a pan by mistake, she sees that Ludmila suffers from PTSD. Ludmila reveals that her body has war trauma and acts out whenever it senses even a slight danger. In 1941, the Soviet ships were attacked by German air troops, which left many of the Soviet soldiers dead. Ludmila was among the many who were on those ships. The sudden attack sends Ludmila in a state of shock. Her friend Masha finds her and then makes her come back to her senses. After getting fully healed from her injuries, Ludmila approaches General Ivan to sign some papers and get her back on the battlefield. Ivan agrees on the condition that a doctor references her paper and signs that she's fit. Ludmila then goes to Boris and asks him to sign the paper. During that, she hears news of her former unit's arrival into the city of Sevastopol. Excited to meet Marikov, Leonid hurries to see the soldiers. But there she finds out that Marikov died in the battlefield and left his sniper for her. Later, Ludmila gets the papers signed by Boris and thanks him by kissing him. Soon after returning to the battlefield, Ludmila starts enjoying hurting Nazi soldiers rather than just shooting at their heads. Her new commander Leonid then puts her aside and says they are not fascist, and she shouldn't make the enemies suffer like that. Despite the rough start to their partnership, they slowly grow fond of each other after completing countless missions side by side. After successfully defending the city of Sevastopol, the Soviet army throw a small celebration. There, Boris gets to meet Leonid and asks if he loves Ludmila. Just then, Leonid defends Ludmila against a drunk soldier and proceeds to kiss her. Soon they both confess their love for each other. Together they go on to kill more Nazi soldiers. Meanwhile, her friend Mash confesses that she wants to get married to her boyfriend, who's in the Air Force. She invites both Ludmila and Leonid to witness her wedding. But on the day of the wedding, Masha reveals that her boyfriend got killed. They later mourn the death of Misha's boyfriend instead of celebrating a wedding. Later, Ludmila tells Leonid that she wants a baby from him. Hearing this, Leonid remains silent and doesn't answer. A few days later, when they're out on patrol, Leonid accidentally steps on a trap that triggers a flare. It signals the artillery fire on their positions. Ludmila and Leonid run to save themselves from the attack, but they fail to escape the field. Leonid shields Ludmila from the attack and ends up heavily injuring himself. Ludmila then carries him to safety, but faints due to exhaustion. Days later, Ludmila wakes up in the military hospital where Boris informs her that Leonid died in the ambush. Boris then comforts Ludmila and says she's not fit to return to the battlefield due to the physical and mental stress. But just then, a commander enters the room and orders his men to take Ludmila as they need more soldiers on the front. Moreover, she is forced to stand up on her feet and pose happily for a photo which they're going to use for Soviet propaganda. Later, she is told to go on a mission to execute a top sniper from the Nazi army. Ludmila says she's not fit to return to the battlefield, but the commander insists she do the mission and sends her anyway. The mission requires her to stay camouflaged for days without moving away from her position. After days of not getting enough sleep and food, Ludmila gets really exhausted and tired of waiting. So she exposes her position to the Nazi sniper and gets shot. But somehow she manages to kill the Nazi sniper and completes her mission. Meanwhile, Boris goes to the general and asks him to let Luda leave the battlefield, as she's not fit in any way to continue fighting. Despite some reluctance, the general agrees to let Ludmila go, Around the same time, the city of Sevastopol gets under siege by the Nazi. The local citizens are evacuating the city as the Nazis get closer to capture the city. After getting the approval, Boris takes Ludmila to get on board a boat to leave the city. Ludmila later realizes that Boris took permission for only her, and he'll have to stay back and help in the war. A narration reveals that not many of the citizens were able to escape, and only top politicians, officers, and people of power got to escape the city. Boris, Masha, and many of the other soldiers lost their lives while defending the city of Sevastopol. Moving to 1942, Ludmila is about to give a speech in Chicago, where she wears a beautiful dress, but the Soviet officers don't allow her to do so and order her to change back to the uniform of the Red Army. This all is a propaganda to use Ludmila and her accomplishments to raise more funds. While changing, Mrs. Roosevelt sees scars all over Ludmila's body, which goes to tell how much she suffered in the war. During the speech, Ludmila acts as she's told by her commanders and boasts about the number of fascist enemies she killed on the battlefield. But then she speaks for herself and ends her speech by asking the men, "Don't you think, gentlemen, that you have been hiding behind my back for too long?" Ludmila gets a round of applause from everyone in the crowd. Miss Roosevelt then ends her story by saying that Ludmila went back to complete her studies in the university. Miss Roosevelt then visits Ludmila at an opera show, where we get to see that Ludmila has a son, presumably Leonid. Thank you so much for staying till the end of the video. If you enjoyed this recap, please leave a like and make sure to subscribe to the channel for future videos.